The music stopped the moment Elira Hartley stepped onto the stage, and the entire hall fell silent, as if the air itself had been pulled out of the room. She did not know why every candle along the walls flickered at the same second her foot touched the wooden floor. She did not know that the man standing near the back of the hall, hidden behind a plain gray mask, had gone completely still. She only knew that her heart was pounding, that hundreds of eyes were on her, and that she had promised her grandmother she would perform this dance exactly the way it had been taught for generations. The Masquerade Festival was the biggest event of the year in the town of Millbrook, a place where humans gathered once every autumn to celebrate old traditions nobody quite remembered the meaning of anymore. Elira had grown up hearing the story of this dance from her grandmother, who called it the Dance of the Silver Moon. It was slow at first, then wild, filled with sharp turns and sudden drops, movements that seemed to chase something invisible through the air. Nobody in Millbrook knew what the dance truly meant. Nobody except the man in the gray mask. His name was Draven Ashworth, and he was the Alpha King of the Northern Pax, ruler of a hidden world that existed just beyond the tree line surrounding the town. Draven had not planned to attend a human festival. He had come only because his advisor, an old wolf named Edmund Cole, insisted that a strange pull had been detected near Millbrook for the past 3 nights, a pull that felt older than anything in the Pack's records. Draven had dismissed it as nonsense. Pulls like that had not been felt in centuries. The last time such energy had appeared, it marked the birth of a true mate bond, a connection so rare that most wolves lived and died without ever witnessing one. He told himself he was only there to investigate a disturbance. He told himself this was nothing more than duty. Then the girl started to dance. Her movements were slow and careful, her arms lifting like she was gathering moonlight into her hands. Draven's breathing changed without his permission. His wolf, a presence he had kept locked away and disciplined since he was a boy of 12, suddenly surged against the walls of his control like a storm breaking through a dam. He gripped the edge of the balcony rail so hard the wood cracked beneath his fingers. Nobody around him noticed. To the humans nearby, he was just another masked guest enjoying the show. But Edmund, standing 2 steps behind him, noticed immediately. He saw the king's shoulders tense, saw his jaw tighten, saw a flicker of gold pass through his eyes for half a second before vanishing again. "My king," Edmund whispered, careful to keep his voice low. "Are you well?" Draven did not answer. He could not look away from the girl on the stage. Her dance grew faster. Her feet moved in patterns that mirrored something ancient, something Draven recognized from stories his own mother used to tell him when he was young, stories about the earliest wolves and the mates chosen for them by fate itself. This dance was not a coincidence. It was not simply tradition passed down through a human family for entertainment. It was a calling. Somewhere, long ago, this dance had been created by a wolf who loved a human woman so deeply that he taught her the very steps his own body used when searching for its true mate under the full moon. The dance had been passed from that woman to her daughter, and her daughter's daughter, drifting further and further from its original purpose, until it became nothing more than a beautiful performance nobody understood. Until tonight. Until this girl, with no wolf blood in her veins at all, performed it so perfectly that something in Draven's very soul recognized her. His control slipped further. The wooden rail beneath his hands splintered completely, and he barely noticed. His wolf howled inside him, desperate to break free, desperate to move closer to the stage, closer to her. "Draven," Edmund said again, this time with real alarm in his voice, "you must calm yourself. There are humans everywhere." The reminder helped, but only slightly. Draven closed his eyes and focused on his breathing, the way his father had taught him decades ago. In through the nose, hold, out through the mouth. He repeated it 3 times before he trusted himself to open his eyes again. The girl was still dancing. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and moved with her like it was part of the performance itself. Her eyes were closed, her face calm and focused, completely unaware of the chaos she was causing in a stranger's chest from across the room. Draven had ruled the Northern Pax for nearly a decade. He had faced rival alphas in combat, negotiated peace treaties with packs twice the size of his own, and made decisions that determined the survival of thousands of wolves under his protection. He had never once lost control of himself in public. Until now. The dance reached its final movement, a slow spin followed by a deep bow, and the hall erupted into applause. Alira opened her eyes, smiling shyly at the crowd, clearly relieved the performance was over. Draven moved before he even decided to. He pushed past Edmund, past several startled guests, weaving through the crowded hall toward the stage. His wolf was screaming at him to get closer, to confirm what every instinct in his body already knew. He told himself he only wanted to ask her about the dance, wanted to understand where she had learned it. That was reasonable. That was something a king investigating a mysterious pull might do. But by the time he reached the front of the hall, Alira had already stepped down from the stage and disappeared into a crowd of friends, congratulating her on the performance. Draven searched the sea of masks and colorful costumes, his heart pounding in a way it had not since he was a young wolf fighting his first real battle. He caught a glimpse of dark hair near the exit doors and pushed forward, but by the time he reached the doorway, the cool night air greeted him instead of the woman he was searching for. She was gone. Draven stood in the doorway for a long moment, breathing hard, his fists clenched at his sides. Around him, festival guests continued laughing and talking, completely unaware that the most powerful wolf in the region was standing among them, shaken to his core by a woman whose name he did not even know. Edmund found him there several minutes later. "My king," he said carefully, "we should return home. Whatever this is, it can wait until morning." Draven turned to face his advisor, and Edmund took an involuntary step back at the intensity in his king's eyes. "Find her," Draven said, his voice low and rough, barely controlled. "I don't care what it takes. I don't care how long it takes. Find out who she is." "My king, we don't even know her name. There were hundreds of guests tonight." "Then start with the dance," Draven said. "Someone taught her that dance. Someone in her family knows exactly what it means, even if she doesn't. Find the family. Find her." Edmund studied his king's face for a long moment, understanding slowly settling over him like a weight. In all his years of service, he had never seen Draven look this way, never seen the careful, controlled Alpha King so completely unraveled by a single dance performed by a human girl who likely had no idea what she had just done. "It has been a long time since I have seen you like this," Edmund said quietly. "I know," Draven admitted. "The last king who felt a pull this strong found his true mate within the same season." Draven said nothing, but something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like fear, mixed with a desperate kind of hope he had never allowed himself to feel before. "Find her," he repeated. "Tonight, if you can." Edmund bowed his head and left to gather trackers from among the pack members who had accompanied them into town. Draven remained by the entrance of the hall, staring out into the darkness where the girl had vanished, his wolf still restless beneath his skin, still calling out for something it had waited centuries to find. He did not know her name. He did not know where she lived, what she did with her days, or anything at all about the life she led beyond the dance he had just witnessed. All he knew was the way her movements had spoken directly to something ancient inside him, the way his entire being had recognized her, before his mind even understood what was happening. For a king who had spent his entire adult life in complete control of every decision, every emotion, every instinct, the feeling was terrifying. It was also the first thing in years that had made him feel truly alive. Behind him, the festival continued, oblivious to the fact that an ancient bond had just stirred awake inside the hall, one that would soon pull two very different worlds together, whether either of them was ready for it or not. Draven turned and walked back into the night, already planning how he would find her, already knowing that nothing in his carefully ordered life would ever be the same again. Meanwhile, several streets away, Alira Hartley walked home alone under the moonlight, humming softly to herself, completely unaware that she was being watched from the shadows by pack members loyal to a king she had never met, and completely unaware that her quiet, ordinary life was about to change forever. She reached her small apartment above the flower shop where she worked, let herself inside, and changed out of her costume, still thinking about how well the performance had gone. Her grandmother would have been proud. She had performed every step exactly as she had been taught, exactly as her grandmother had performed it decades before her, and her grandmother's mother before that. She had no idea the dance was anything more than a beautiful family tradition. She had no idea that somewhere out in the darkness, a king could not stop thinking about her, that his entire pack had been thrown into quiet chaos by a pull none of them had felt in generations, or that her life was about to become far more complicated, far more dangerous, and far more extraordinary than she had ever imagined possible. As she climbed into bed that night, Alira felt an odd, unfamiliar warmth settle over her, a feeling she could not explain, like something important had shifted somewhere, just outside her understanding. She dismissed it as excitement from the performance, and drifted off to sleep, unaware that far across town, Draven Ashworth stood awake at his window, staring out at the same moon, wondering if she was somewhere beneath it too, and knowing with absolute certainty that he would not rest until he found her again. The search had already begun. By morning, it would reach far beyond anything either of them could have expected, and the quiet, ordinary life Alira had always known would begin slipping away, replaced by a truth stranger and more powerful than any story her grandmother had ever told her. Morning came quickly for Draven, though he had not slept at all. He stood in the war room of his estate, a stone chamber lined with maps of Pack territory and old portraits of kings who had come before him, and he listened as Edmund delivered the news he had been waiting for since dawn. "Her name is Alira Hartley," Edmund said, placing a small photograph on the table between them. "She works at a flower shop on the edge of town, 24 years old, no family nearby except her grandmother, who lives just outside Millbrook." Draven picked up the photograph, and something in his chest tightened at the sight of her face in daylight, calm and unaware, nothing like the intense stillness she had carried on stage the night before. "The grandmother," he said. "Tell me about her." "Her name is Grace Hartley. According to the trackers, she has lived near Millbrook her entire life. The dance has been passed down through her family for at least 4 generations, possibly longer. Nobody in the family has any wolf blood that we can find. As far as we can tell, they are entirely human." "Then how does a human family know a mating dance that predates most of our written history?" Edmund shook his head. "That is the question none of us can answer yet." Draven set the photograph down carefully, as if handling something fragile, and walked toward the tall windows overlooking the Pack's territory. Forests stretched endlessly in every direction, home to hundreds of wolves who depended on him for protection and leadership. He had built his entire identity around control, around making decisions with a clear head, never letting emotion cloud his judgment. And yet here he was, unable to stop thinking about a woman he had spoken to for exactly 0 words. "I need to see her again," he said quietly. "My king, I would advise caution," Edmund said. "A pull this strong has consequences. If this is truly a mate bond, and if it becomes public that your bond is with a human, there will be those among the Packs who see this as a weakness to exploit. I am aware of the risk. Are you aware that the Southern Packs have been searching for any excuse to challenge your rule since your father passed? A human mate would give them exactly what they need." Raven turned to face his advisor, his expression hard. "I did not choose this, Edmund. None of us choose our mates. If the bond is real, it will not disappear simply because it is inconvenient for my enemies." Edmund studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. He had served the Ashworth family for over 30 years, first under Draven's father, and now under Draven himself, and he understood better than anyone the weight that came with wearing the crown. He also understood that fate rarely cared about convenience. "What would you have me do?" Edmund asked. "Arrange a reason for me to visit her shop, something ordinary, something that will not draw suspicion." Edmund considered this, then allowed a small smile. "The palace does need flowers for the upcoming gathering with the Eastern Packs. It would not be unusual for someone to visit a local shop to place an order." "Then that is what we will do." Draven spent the rest of the morning trying to focus on Pack business, reviewing reports from his territory patrols, meeting with Pack elders about upcoming decisions, listening to updates from his beta about tensions along the southern border. None of it held his attention the way it normally did. His mind kept drifting back to the dance, to the way Alira's body had moved with such natural grace, to the pull in his chest that refused to fade no matter how many hours passed. By early afternoon, he could not wait any longer. He dressed in simple human clothing, Nothing that marked him as anything other than an ordinary man, and made his way into Millbrook alone, leaving Edmund and his guards behind despite their protests. He wanted this first real meeting to happen without an audience, without the pressure of his title hovering over every word. The flower shop was small and warm, filled with the scent of fresh blooms and old wood. Bells above the door chimed softly as he stepped inside, and for a moment, he simply stood there, breathing in the space, letting his eyes adjust to the dim afternoon light filtering through the front windows. Then he saw her. Elira stood behind the counter, arranging a bundle of white roses, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows, a smudge of dirt on her cheek that she clearly had not noticed. She looked nothing like the mysterious dancer from the night before, and yet Draven felt the same overwhelming pull settle into his chest the moment his eyes found her. "Welcome," she said, glancing up with a friendly smile that did not yet recognize him. "I'll be right with you." Draven nodded, unable to trust his voice for a moment. He busied himself pretending to examine a display of flowers near the door, using the time to steady his breathing, to remind himself that he needed to appear calm, ordinary, unremarkable. When Elira finished with the roses, she wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward him with an easy, welcoming energy that made something in his chest ache in a way he did not fully understand. "What can I help you find today?" she asked. "I need flowers," Draven said, then immediately felt foolish at how obvious the statement sounded. For an event, something large, formal. A wedding? A gathering, between families. Elira nodded, moving toward a small notebook on the counter to begin writing down details. "How many guests are we talking about?" "Several hundred." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "That's quite a gathering." "It's an important one," Draven said, watching her closely, searching her face for any sign of recognition, any indication that some part of her sensed what he had felt the night before. But there was nothing except polite professional interest, and he felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment at that realization. "Well, I can definitely help with something that size, though I'll need a few days to source enough flowers for a proper arrangement," Elira said, tapping her pen against the notebook. "Do you have a color scheme in mind? A theme?" Draven had not thought this far ahead. He had used the flower order as an excuse to see her, never actually considering what type of arrangement a palace gathering might require. "White and gold," he said, choosing colors that felt appropriately regal, without giving away too much. Something elegant. "I love a good white and gold palette," Elira said, already sketching rough ideas on her notepad. "White roses, gold-dusted eucalyptus, maybe some cream-colored ranunculus for texture. I could put together something really beautiful." "I trust your judgment," Draven said, and he meant it more than she could possibly know. They spent the next several minutes discussing details, and Draven found himself completely captivated by the way she spoke about flowers, the genuine passion in her voice when she described different arrangements, the careful way she considered each suggestion before offering her professional opinion. There was nothing performative about her here, nothing like the deliberate grace of her dance. This was simply who she was, warm and thoughtful, and entirely unaware of the effect she had on the stranger standing across the counter from her. "You seem very passionate about this work," Draven said eventually, unable to stop himself from prolonging the conversation even after the practical details had been settled. Elira smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that made his chest tighten further. "I grew up around flowers. My grandmother taught me everything I know. She always said flowers remember things people forget. Old stories, old feelings. I think that's part of why I love this work so much." "Your grandmother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She is," Elira said fondly. "She actually taught me a dance too, one that's been in our family for generations. I performed it at the festival last night actually." Draven's entire body went still. "A dance?" he asked carefully, keeping his voice as neutral as possible. "It's called the Dance of the Silver Moon. Nobody really knows where it came from originally, but my family has performed it every generation for as long as anyone can remember. It's strange, actually." She paused, tilting her head slightly as if considering something for the first time. "Last night felt different than usual. I can't really explain it. Like the whole room went quiet in a way it never has before." Draven's heart pounded against his ribs. He wanted desperately to tell her everything, to explain the ancient meaning behind the dance she had performed so innocently, to explain the way his entire world had shifted the moment she stepped onto that stage. But he knew revealing the truth now, in a public shop with humans walking past the windows outside, would only frighten her, would only make her question his sanity or his intentions. Perhaps the audience simply appreciated something beautiful, he said instead. Alira studied him for a moment, something curious flickering across her expression, as if she sensed there was more beneath his careful words but could not quite identify what it was. Maybe, she said slowly. Anyway, I'll have your order ready within a few days. Should I contact you when it's finished, or would you prefer to come by yourself? I will come myself, Draven said quickly, perhaps too quickly, based on the small smile that crossed her lips. I look forward to it, she said. And something in her tone suggested she genuinely meant it, though whether that meant anything beyond simple professional courtesy, Draven could not be certain. He left the shop several minutes later, stepping back out into the afternoon sunlight with his mind spinning, his wolf finally settling into a quieter, more satisfied state after having been so close to her again. He had learned her name properly, learned about her grandmother, learned the true name of the dance that had thrown his entire world into chaos the night before. He had also learned that whatever this connection was between them, it would need to be handled with extraordinary care. Alira had no idea about the world of wolves and packs that existed just beyond her town. She had no idea about mate bonds, about ancient dances passed down through generations that carried far more meaning than simple family tradition. And somewhere out there, forces beyond his control were already beginning to notice the change in him, already beginning to ask questions about why their king had suddenly developed such intense interest in an ordinary human woman running a flower shop on the edge of pack territory. Draven walked back toward the tree line where his guards waited, already planning his next visit to the shop, already counting the days until he would see her again, completely unaware that his sudden trips into Millbrook had not gone unnoticed by everyone in his life. Far behind him, hidden among the trees at the edge of town, a pair of golden eyes watched him leave the shop, narrowed with calculation, before disappearing silently back into the forest, to deliver a report that would soon reach ears far less friendly than Edmund's. The forbidden dance had awakened something ancient in the Alpha King, and word of that awakening was about to spread far beyond the borders of his own pack, carried by those who saw opportunity in his newfound weakness, setting into motion events that would soon threaten everything Draven Ashworth had ever built, and everyone he had sworn to protect. 3 days passed before Draven returned to the flower shop, though it felt like an eternity to him. Every night, his wolf paced restlessly beneath his skin, refusing to settle, refusing to let him focus on anything beyond the memory of Alira's voice, her laugh, the easy warmth she carried in every movement. He told himself he was simply collecting the flower arrangement he had ordered. He told himself the visits meant nothing beyond practical necessity. But Edmund, watching from a careful distance, knew better than to believe his king's excuses. "You've visited that shop 4 times this week," Edmund said one evening, finding Draven staring out over the training grounds where young pack members practiced their combat forms under the setting sun. "The order was finished 2 days ago." "There were details to discuss," Draven said, not turning around. "Details about flower arrangements," Edmund said skeptically. Draven finally turned to face him, and something in his expression made Edmund immediately regret pushing the subject. "What would you have me do, Edmund? Ignore what I feel? Pretend this bond does not exist, simply because it complicates things?" "I would have you be careful," Edmund said gently. "That is all. The Southern Packs already suspect something is different. Alpha Victor Sterling has been asking questions among his contacts in Millbrook. If he learns the truth before you are ready to reveal it yourself, he will use it against you." Draven's jaw tightened at the mention of Victor Sterling, the ambitious young Alpha, who had been searching for any weakness in Draven's rule since the moment he took the throne from his father. Victor commanded one of the largest packs in the region, and his hunger for greater territory was well known throughout every pack that bordered his own. "Let him ask his questions," Draven said finally. "I will not hide who I am, or who my mate might be, simply to protect myself from his ambitions." "And if the bond puts her in danger?" Edmund asked quietly. Have you considered that possibility, my king? A human mate is vulnerable, in ways one of our own kind would never be. If Victor discovers the truth, he may see her as a target, rather than simply an inconvenience. The question landed with the weight Edmund intended, and Draven fell silent, staring out at the training grounds without truly seeing the wolves practicing there. He had been so consumed by the pull toward Alira that he had not fully considered what her connection to him might mean for her safety. The world of the Pax was not gentle toward those who threatened an alpha's position, and a mate bond with a human would be seen by many as exactly that kind of threat. I will protect her, Draven said finally, his voice firm with quiet determination. Whatever comes, I will make certain she is protected. Edmund studied his king for a long moment before nodding slowly. Then perhaps it is time to tell her the truth, before someone else does it for you, in a way far less kind than you would choose. The words settled heavily in Draven's chest, because he knew Edmund was right. He could not continue visiting the shop under false pretenses forever, could not keep inventing reasons to see her while the true nature of their connection remained hidden. Alira deserved to know the truth, deserved the chance to understand what was happening to her life before it was decided for her by forces she did not even know existed. The following afternoon, Draven returned to the shop one final time, though this visit felt different from the ones before it. He arrived just as Alira was preparing to close for the day, the last golden light of afternoon spilling through the front windows and catching in her dark hair as she swept the floor near the counter. She looked up when the bells above the door chimed, and her face brightened with the easy warmth that had become achingly familiar to him over the past several days. "Back again," she said, leaning her broom against the counter. "I promise the flowers were perfect. You don't need to keep checking on them." "I'm not here about the flowers," Draven said. Something in his tone must have carried the weight of what he intended to say, because Alira's smile faded slightly, replaced by careful curiosity. "Then why are you here?" Draven took a slow breath, gathering his thoughts, trying to find the right words for a conversation he had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. "Would you walk with me? There is something I need to explain, and I think it would be easier outside." Alira studied him for a long moment, and he watched uncertainty flicker across her features, though it did not seem to be fear, exactly, more like the careful hesitation of someone who sensed the ground beneath her was about to shift in some fundamental way. "All right," she said finally, removing her apron and grabbing her coat from a hook near the back room. "But you're being very mysterious, and I have to warn you, I don't love mysteries." Draven allowed himself a small, genuine smile at that, the first real moment of lightness he had felt in days. "I promise to be as clear as possible." They walked together through the quiet streets of Millbrook as evening settled over the town, the last light of day fading into soft purple shadows. Draven led her toward the edge of town, near the tree line where his territory began, choosing a location where he could be certain their conversation would not be overheard by curious ears. "So," Alira said as they walked, "are you finally going to tell me your name? It seems strange that I've spoken with you multiple times now, and I still don't actually know who you are." Draven had been avoiding this exact question for days, uncertain how to introduce himself without immediately raising questions he was not yet ready to answer. But the time for careful avoidance had passed. "My name is Draven Ashworth," he said. "I am the Alpha King of the Northern Pax." Alira stopped walking, staring at him with an expression that mixed confusion with the beginning of genuine alarm. "I'm sorry." "The what?" "I know this sounds impossible," Draven said gently, "but I need you to trust me while I explain. There is a world that exists alongside your own, one that most humans never see or even suspect is real. My people are shifters, wolves who can take human form. We have lived in these territories for centuries, governed by our own laws, our own leadership, separate from human society but never far from it." Alira's face had gone pale, and she took a small step backward, her hand rising instinctively to press against her chest. "This isn't funny," she said quietly. "If this is some kind of strange joke, I really don't find it amusing." "It is not a joke," Draven said, keeping his voice as calm and steady as possible, aware that any sudden movement or intensity might frighten her further. "I know this is difficult to accept. I would not expect you to believe me without proof, and I am prepared to offer that proof if you are willing to see it." She stared at him for a long moment, her breathing quick and shallow, clearly caught between disbelief and something deeper, something that recognized the absolute sincerity in his voice, even as her rational mind rejected everything he was telling her. "Prove it," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Draven nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what he was about to do, understanding that once he revealed this part of himself, there would be no returning to the careful, ordinary interactions they had shared over the past several days. He stepped back several paces, giving himself room, and allowed the control he had maintained for so long to loosen. Just slightly, just enough. The change came quickly, the way it always did for those with strong control over their shift, his human form dissolving into something larger, more powerful. A massive wolf, with fur the color of midnight, and eyes that glowed with the same intensity Illyra had seen flickering behind his human gaze during their conversations. Illyra gasped, stumbling back another step, her hand flying to cover her mouth. For a long moment, she simply stared at the enormous wolf standing before her, its golden eyes watching her with careful patience, waiting to see how she would react. Then, slowly, hesitantly, she took a step forward instead of retreating further. "This is real," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "This is actually real." Draven shifted back into his human form, moving carefully, giving her time to adjust to the sight of him again, as a man, rather than the massive creature that had stood before her moments ago. "I understand this is overwhelming," he said. "I know it changes everything you thought you understood about the world." "You could say that," Illyra said, her voice still shaky, though the initial shock was slowly giving way to something more curious than afraid. "So all of this, the shop visits, the questions about my grandmother, this was never really about flowers at all, was it?" "No," Draven admitted. "It began the night of the festival, when you performed your family's dance." "The dance of the silver moon," Illyra said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in her expression. "You said it seemed like the audience appreciated something beautiful. That wasn't the whole truth, was it?" "No," Draven said again. "That dance is far older than your family realizes, Illyra. It was created generations ago by one of my ancestors, a wolf who loved a human woman so completely that he taught her the movements his own body used when searching for its true mate. Somewhere along the way, the meaning was lost, but the dance itself survived, passed down through your family for generations without anyone understanding what it truly represented." Illyra's eyes widened as the implications settled over her. "Are you saying that when I performed it, I felt something I have not felt in my entire life?" Draven said quietly, closing the distance between them slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away if she needed to. "Among my kind, there exists a bond between certain pairs, a connection deeper than choice, deeper than circumstance. We call it a mate bond, and it is exceptionally rare. The moment you performed that dance, I felt that bond awaken inside me, calling toward you specifically, in a way I cannot fully explain or control." The evening air felt suddenly charged between them, heavy with the weight of everything Draven had just revealed. Illyra stared at him, her expression a complicated mixture of fear, wonder, and something else entirely, something that looked almost like recognition, as if some part of her had already sensed this connection, long before he put it into words. "I don't know what to say to any of this," she admitted softly. "You don't have to say anything tonight," Draven said. "I only wanted you to know the truth, whatever you decide to do with it. I will not force this bond upon you, Illyra. Whatever happens next is entirely your choice." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something in his expression, and whatever she found there seemed to ease some of the tension in her shoulders, even if the fear had not entirely disappeared. "I need time," she said finally. "This is a lot to process." "Take whatever time you need," Draven said, though something in his chest ached at the thought of walking away from her now, after finally revealing the truth that had been building between them for days. They stood together in silence for a long moment, the last light of evening fading completely into darkness around them. Two people standing at the edge of two very different worlds, uncertain what the future held, but both aware, in some quiet, undeniable way, that their lives had already changed beyond any possibility of returning to how things were before. Neither of them noticed the pair of eyes watching from deep within the tree line, nor did they hear the soft, deliberate footsteps retreating silently into the forest, carrying news of what had just been revealed, toward ears that would use the information in ways neither Draven nor Alira could yet imagine. The truth had finally been spoken between them, but the danger surrounding that truth was only just beginning to stir. Alira did not sleep at all that night. She lay awake in her small apartment above the flower shop, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of what she had witnessed at the edge of the forest. The image of Draven transforming into that massive wolf played over and over in her mind, impossible and undeniable at the same time. By morning, exhaustion had settled into her bones, but her thoughts had not slowed at all. She dressed quickly and made her way to her grandmother's small cottage on the outskirts of town, needing answers that only Grace Hartley might be able to provide. Grace was in her garden when Alira arrived, tending to a bed of lavender with the same careful attention she gave to everything in her life. She looked up as Alira approached, and something in her expression shifted immediately, as if she had been expecting this visit for a very long time. "You look like you haven't slept," Grace said, setting down her gardening tools. "Grandmother, I need to ask you something," Alira said, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. The dance of the silver moon. Where did it actually come from?" Grace's expression grew thoughtful, and she gestured for Alira to sit with her on the small bench near the lavender beds. "I wondered when this conversation would come," she said quietly. "Sit, dear. This is a longer story than you might expect." Alira sat, her heart pounding as she waited for her grandmother to begin. "The dance has been in our family for 6 generations, Grace said. "It was taught to my great-great-grandmother by a man she loved very much, though he was not entirely a man, not in the way most people understand the word. You know," Alira said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've always known." "I have always known," Grace confirmed. "Our family has carried this secret carefully, passing down the dance without always fully explaining its origins, waiting to see if the truth would ever become necessary to share. I did not expect it to happen quite this way, but I suspected it might happen eventually, especially once I saw how the crowd reacted to your performance at the festival." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Alira asked, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. "Because some truths need to find their own time," Grace said gently. "I did not know if the bond would ever awaken for you specifically. These things are rare and unpredictable, and I did not want to burden you with expectations that might never come to pass. But it seems fate had other plans." Alira sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything her grandmother had just confirmed. Somewhere deep inside, she had hoped Grace would tell her this was all some strange misunderstanding, that Draven had been mistaken, that the world was still exactly as ordinary as she had always believed it to be. But her grandmother's calm acceptance only confirmed what she had already witnessed with her own eyes the night before. "What happens now?" Alira asked softly. Grace reached over and took her granddaughter's hand, holding it gently between her own weathered fingers. "That, my dear, is entirely up to you. A mate bond is powerful, but it is not a chain. You are not required to accept it simply because it exists. Many humans throughout history have chosen to walk away from such connections, though I will tell you honestly, those who chose to embrace them rarely regretted it." "Did anyone in our family ever accept the bond fully?" Alira asked. Grace's eyes grew distant, as if looking back through generations of memory. "My great-great-grandmother did. She lived a long and happy life beside the wolf who loved her, though it was not without difficulty. Their world can be dangerous for those of us without wolf blood, Alira. There are those among his kind who value strength and power above all else, who see human mates as weaknesses to exploit or targets to eliminate." The warning settled heavily in Alira's chest, echoing the concerns Draven himself had expressed the night before about protecting her from potential danger. "He told me something similar," Alira admitted, "that there are those who might see this bond as a weakness. Then he is being honest with you, which speaks well of him," Grace said. "That honesty matters more than you might realize, dear. Trust is everything in a bond like this." They sat together in the quiet garden for a long while after that, Grace sharing more details about the family history she had carefully preserved through generations, stories of the original wolf who had loved her ancestor so deeply, details about the ancient customs and laws that governed the world Draven belonged to. By the time Alira finally left her grandmother's cottage, the sun had climbed high into the afternoon sky, and though she still carried uncertainty in her heart, she also carried a clearer understanding of the choice now before her. She spent the rest of the day at the flower shop, moving through her usual tasks with distracted focus, her mind constantly circling back to everything she had learned. Customers came and went, unaware of the extraordinary weight settled over the young woman arranging their bouquets, and Alira found herself grateful for the routine familiarity of her work, even as everything else in her life felt suddenly unfamiliar and uncertain. As evening approached and she prepared to close the shop, the bells above the door chimed softly, and she looked up expecting to see Draven, half hoping and half fearing his return. Instead, a stranger stood in the doorway, a tall man with sharp features and an unsettling smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Miss Hartley," the man said smoothly, stepping further into the shop. "I apologize for the late visit. My name is Victor Sterling." Something about his tone made the hair on the back of Alira's neck stand up, though she could not immediately identify why. "How can I help you, Mr. Sterling?" "I understand you have become quite important to Alpha King Draven Ashworth," Victor said, moving closer to the counter with slow, deliberate steps. "I wanted to meet the woman who has captured his attention so completely." Alira's heart began pounding rapidly. "I'm not sure what you're talking about." Victor's smile widened, though the expression remained cold. "There's no need to pretend, Miss Hartley. I know exactly what you are to him. I simply wanted to see for myself what kind of woman could distract the most disciplined alpha in the Northern Territories." "I think you should leave," Alira said, her voice steadier than she felt, her hand moving instinctively toward the small pair of scissors she kept near the register. "I mean you no harm," Victor said, though his tone carried an edge that suggested otherwise. "I simply wanted to offer a piece of friendly advice. The world Draven belongs to is not kind to humans who involve themselves in matters beyond their understanding. If I were you, I would consider walking away from this connection before it puts you in danger you cannot possibly comprehend." "I appreciate the concern," Alira said sharply, "but I think I can make my own decisions about my life." Victor studied her for a long moment, something calculating flickering behind his eyes. Bold words for someone who has no idea what she is truly dealing with. "Enjoy your evening, Miss Hartley. I suspect we will speak again soon." He turned and left the shop as smoothly as he had entered, the bells chiming softly behind him, leaving Alira standing alone in the sudden silence, her heart still racing, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the counter for support. She did not know who Victor Sterling truly was, or why his casual threat carried such weight despite his polite tone, but every instinct in her body told her that whatever conflict existed between him and Draven, she had just become tangled directly in the middle of it. She reached for her phone with shaking hands, uncertain who to call, uncertain how to explain what had just happened to anyone who might not believe the strange new world she had only just discovered was real. In the end, she found herself dialing the number Draven had given her the night before, her fingers trembling as she pressed the phone to her ear, waiting anxiously through each ring, desperately hoping he would answer quickly. He did, his voice immediately alert the moment he heard the tension in her greeting. "Alira, what's wrong?" "Someone came to see me," she said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to remain calm. "A man named Victor Sterling. He knew about us. He knew about the bond." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line, and when Draven finally spoke again, his voice had gone dangerously quiet, carrying a controlled fury that Alira had not heard from him before. "Stay exactly where you are," he said. "Lock the door. I am coming to you right now." The urgency in his tone left no room for argument, and as Alira moved quickly to lock the shop's front entrance, her hands still trembling, she understood with sudden, terrifying clarity that whatever peaceful, ordinary life she had known before the festival was now completely and irrevocably behind her. The forbidden dance had opened a door she could never close again, and on the other side of that door waited dangers she was only just beginning to understand. Draven arrived at the flower shop faster than Alira thought possible, his expression tight with barely controlled anger the moment she opened the door to let him inside. He scanned the small shop quickly, checking every corner, as if expecting Victor to still be lurking somewhere among the flower arrangements, before finally turning his full attention to her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with restrained emotion. "No," Elira said, wrapping her arms around herself. "He didn't touch me, he just talked, but it felt like a threat, even though he was smiling the whole time." Draven's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Elira saw something flicker behind his eyes, a flash of gold that reminded her sharply of the wolf she had witnessed the night before. He took a slow breath, visibly working to control his reaction before speaking again. "Tell me exactly what he said." Elira recounted the conversation as clearly as she could remember it, watching Draven's expression grow darker with every word. By the time she finished, his hands had curled into tight fists at his sides, and the tension radiating from him filled the small shop like a physical presence. "Victor Sterling leads one of the largest packs in the Southern Territories," Draven said finally. "He has wanted a larger claim over northern lands for years, and he has been searching for any weakness in my position that he could exploit to justify a challenge. A human mate would give him exactly the excuse he needs." "What does that mean for me?" Elira asked, fear creeping back into her voice despite her efforts to remain steady. Draven moved closer, taking her hands gently in his own, his touch surprisingly careful given the barely restrained fury still visible in his expression. "It means I made a mistake by not preparing you sooner for what this bond might bring into your life. I should have anticipated that word would spread this quickly." "So what happens now?" Elira asked. "Now, I ensure you are protected," Draven said firmly. "I will assign guards to watch over the shop, over your apartment, over anywhere you go, until this threat is properly handled." Elira felt a flicker of unease at the idea of being constantly watched, even for her own safety, but she also understood, given everything she had witnessed over the past 2 days, that the danger Draven was describing was very real. "And how exactly do you plan to handle Victor?" "That is a matter for pack politics," Draven said carefully. "It does not need to concern you." Something in his tone made Elira pull back slightly, studying his face with growing frustration. "Draven, I just had a stranger walk into my shop and imply that my life is in danger because of a bond I didn't even know existed until yesterday. I think it concerns me quite a lot." Draven seemed to realize his mistake immediately, his expression softening as he recognized the fear and frustration in her voice. "You're right. I apologize. This world is new to you, and I have spent so long protecting the details of pack politics from those outside our world, that I forget not everyone needs that same protection." "Then explain it to me," Elira said. "All of it. I want to understand what I've walked into." Draven guided her to sit at the small table near the back of the shop, and for the next hour, he explained everything as clearly as he could. He told her about the structure of pack leadership, about the delicate balance of power between the various territories, about the way alphas earned and maintained their authority through strength, wisdom, and the respect of those they governed. He explained that a king's mate, whether wolf or human, was considered part of the pack's strength, someone whose safety directly reflected on the king's ability to protect his people. "If Victor believes I am weakened by this bond," Draven explained, "he may attempt to challenge my rule directly, or he may try to use you against me indirectly, to force decisions that benefit his own ambitions." "That sounds incredibly dangerous," Elira said quietly. "It is," Draven admitted, "which is why I need you to trust me when I say that your safety is my absolute priority, above everything else, including my own position as king." Elira studied his face for a long moment, searching for any hint of deception, but found only sincere, unwavering determination. Despite everything, despite the fear still lingering in her chest from her encounter with Victor, she felt a strange sense of calm settle over her at his words, a trust she could not fully explain, given how recently she had learned any of this world existed at all. "I believe you," she said finally. Relief flickered across Draven's expression, quickly followed by renewed determination. "Then let me protect you properly. I want to move you somewhere safer, at least until the immediate threat from Victor has been addressed." "I have a life here, Draven," Elira said. "A job, an apartment, my grandmother nearby. I can't just abandon everything because of a threat I don't fully understand." "I am not asking you to abandon your life," Draven said gently. I am asking you to allow additional protection while we address this situation properly. You can continue working here, continue seeing your grandmother, continue living exactly as you choose. I simply want trusted guards nearby, watching for any sign of danger. Elira considered this for a long moment, before finally nodding, understanding that some compromise was necessary given the circumstances. All right, but I want to be kept informed about everything, Draven. No more secrets. No more careful omissions to protect me from difficult truths. I need to understand what's happening in my own life. Agreed, Draven said immediately, relief clear in his voice. Over the following days, Elira slowly adjusted to her new reality, aware of the quiet presence of guards positioned discreetly around her shop and apartment, though they never interfered directly with her daily routine. Draven visited regularly, no longer needing the excuse of flower orders to justify his presence, and their conversations grew longer, deeper, filled with questions from both sides as they slowly built understanding between two worlds that had never before been meant to intersect so closely. She learned about his childhood, about the weight of responsibility placed on him from a young age after his father's passing, about the loneliness that came with leadership, the careful distance he had always maintained from others to protect himself from exactly this kind of vulnerability. He learned about her passion for flowers, inherited from her grandmother, about her quiet dreams of one day expanding her small shop into something larger, about the steady, patient strength that had carried her through a life that, until recently, she had believed to be entirely ordinary. With each conversation, the pull between them grew stronger, no longer just the ancient calling of an ancestral bond, but something built genuinely between two people, slowly coming to understand and appreciate one another beyond the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. But even as their connection deepened, the threat from Victor Sterling did not disappear. Reports began reaching Draven of increased activity along the southern border, of Victor's pack gathering strength, of rumors spreading throughout the wolf territories about the Northern King's unusual attachment to a human woman. Whispers suggested Victor was building support among other packs, painting Draven's bond as a dangerous weakness that threatened the stability of all northern territories. Edmund brought these reports to Draven with growing concern during a private meeting one evening. The rumors are spreading faster than we anticipated, he said, laying out several documents detailing recent pack movements. Victor has been meeting with smaller packs along the border, suggesting that your judgment has been compromised by this bond, that you are no longer fit to lead effectively. Let him spread whatever rumors he wishes, Draven said, though tension remained visible in his shoulders. My rule has never depended on the approval of Victor Sterling. Perhaps not directly, Edmund said carefully, but if enough smaller packs begin to doubt your leadership, it could create instability throughout the entire Northern Territory, instability Victor could easily exploit to justify a formal challenge for your crown. Draven fell silent, staring out over the darkened training grounds beyond his window, understanding the weight of what Edmund was describing. He had built his rule on strength, on unwavering dedication to his people's well-being, and now that very foundation felt suddenly precarious, threatened not by his own failures, but by fear and misunderstanding surrounding a bond that had chosen him without his permission. What would you have me do? He asked quietly. I would have you consider a formal announcement, Edmund said. Present your bond openly, before Victor can twist the narrative further in his favor. Show the packs that this connection does not weaken you, but strengthens your resolve. Let them see for themselves rather than relying on rumors spread by someone with obvious ambitions of his own. Draven considered this carefully, understanding both the wisdom and the risk in Edmund's suggestion. A formal announcement would mean exposing Elira publicly to the entire wolf community, removing any remaining privacy or protection her anonymity had provided. It would also mean confirming Victor's suspicions beyond any possible denial, eliminating any chance of quietly resolving the situation before it escalated further. But it might also be the only way to shift the narrative in their favor, to demonstrate strength, rather than allowing fear and rumor to define how the packs understood his bond with Elira. I need to speak with her before making any decision, Draven said finally. This affects her as much as it affects me. She deserves a voice in how we proceed. Edmund nodded, understanding and respecting his king's insistence on including Alira in decisions that would so directly impact her safety and her future. Speak with her soon, my king. Victor's influence grows stronger each day we remain silent. As Draven prepared to seek out Alira that evening, unaware of just how quickly circumstances were about to escalate beyond anyone's careful planning, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, both literal and metaphorical, signaling the approach of a storm that would soon test everything the two of them had built together in these short, extraordinary days since the forbidden dance had first brought them together. Alira had grown used to a quiet kind of vigilance since the confrontation with Victor Sterling, a constant awareness of her surroundings that had not existed in her life before that evening. She noticed things now that she never would have paid attention to before, the way certain shadows seemed to linger a moment too long near the edge of her vision, the way the guards positioned discreetly around her shop shifted their attention whenever an unfamiliar face passed by. She was arranging a delivery of fresh tulips when Draven arrived that evening, his expression serious enough that she immediately set down her work and gave him her full attention. "What's happened?" she asked. "Nothing has happened yet," Draven said, though the careful weight in his voice suggested significant news regardless. "But Edmund believes we may need to make a decision soon, one that will affect both of us significantly." He explained Edmund's suggestion carefully, laying out the situation with the southern packs, the growing rumors Victor was spreading among smaller territories, the potential instability threatening the entire northern region if the situation remained unresolved. Alira listened quietly, absorbing every detail, understanding the seriousness of what Draven was describing, even as the practical reality of it settled uncomfortably in her chest. "So the plan is to announce our bond publicly," she said slowly, once he had finished explaining. "That is Edmund's suggestion, yes," Draven confirmed. "But I want to be absolutely clear, Alira. This is not a decision I will make without your full agreement. If you are not ready for this, if you need more time before your life becomes public knowledge throughout the Wolf territories, I will find another way to address Victor's ambitions." Alira sat down slowly at the small table near the back of the shop, processing the weight of the decision before her. A public announcement would mean no more careful privacy, no more quiet adjustment to this new world at her own pace. It would mean immediately becoming a visible, permanent part of a political landscape she barely understood, a target for anyone who saw her connection to Draven as either an opportunity or a threat. "What would happen if we didn't announce it?" she asked. "Victor's rumors will likely continue spreading," Draven said honestly. "He may eventually formalize a challenge against my rule regardless, using whatever narrative benefits him most. Silence does not guarantee safety, Alira. It simply delays the confrontation while allowing him to control how the story is told. And if we do announce it, then we control the narrative ourselves," Draven said. "We show the Pax the truth of our bond, rather than allowing Victor to twist it into something it is not. It carries risk, certainly, but it also removes much of the power he currently holds over the situation." Alira sat in thoughtful silence for a long moment, weighing the two paths before her. Neither option felt entirely safe, but the idea of allowing Victor to control the story, to spread fear and doubt throughout Draven's territory unchallenged, felt somehow worse than facing the risk directly. "I think we should announce it," she said finally. Draven studied her carefully, searching her expression for any hesitation. "Are you certain? This will change your life significantly, Alira. There will be no returning to the quiet anonymity you've known." "I understand that," Alira said, meeting his gaze steadily, despite the nervousness fluttering in her chest. "But I've spent my whole life watching my grandmother carry a secret she never fully understood the weight of, and I don't want to spend the rest of mine hiding from something that might actually be important. If this bond is real, if what we're building together matters, then I don't want to build it in the shadows, out of fear of what other people might think." Something shifted in Draven's expression at her words, a mixture of relief and something deeper, something that looked remarkably like the beginning of genuine love, rather than simply the pull of an ancient bond. He reached across the table and took her hand gently in his own. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for trusting me with this decision, for trusting yourself enough to face it directly. Just promise me one thing," Alira said. "Anything. Promise me you'll actually let me help, rather than trying to handle everything alone to protect me. I know that's probably your instinct, given everything you've told me about your responsibilities as king, but I don't want to be someone you protect from a distance. I want to be someone who stands beside you through whatever comes next." Draven's expression softened further, and he lifted her hand to press a gentle kiss against her knuckles, a gesture that sent warmth flooding through her chest, despite the seriousness of their conversation. "I promise," he said, "whatever comes next, we face it together." The formal announcement was scheduled for 1 week later, timed to coincide with a gathering of pack representatives from across the Northern Territories, an event originally planned to discuss routine matters of trade and border security that would now carry far greater significance. The days leading up to the gathering passed in a blur of preparation. Illyra found herself introduced gradually to aspects of pack life she had never imagined existing, meeting Draven's closest advisors, learning proper customs and expectations for formal wolf gatherings, slowly building a foundation of understanding that would help her navigate the world she was about to step into publicly. Grace visited the palace grounds during this time, offering quiet support and practical wisdom drawn from the family stories she had carried for so many years. "You carry yourself well, dear," she told Illyra one afternoon, watching her granddaughter practice the formal greetings Edmund had been teaching her. "Better than I expected, given how quickly all of this has happened." "I'm terrified," Illyra admitted quietly. "Of course you are," Grace said, smiling gently. "Anyone facing something this significant would feel the same. But fear and courage are not opposites, dear. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is move forward despite being afraid." Illyra held on to those words as the day of the gathering finally arrived, dressing carefully in an elegant gown Edmund had arranged, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared to step into a role she had never imagined existing just weeks before. Draven found her in her private chambers shortly before the gathering began, his own formal attire marking him unmistakably as the powerful king he was, though his expression softened the moment he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "I feel like I might be sick," Illyra admitted with a nervous laugh. Draven crossed the room and took both her hands in his, steadying her with his calm, reassuring presence. "You do not need to be perfect tonight, Illyra. You only need to be yourself. That is more than enough. What if they reject the bond? What if the other packs see me as exactly the weakness Victor claims I am? Then we will handle that challenge together, exactly as we discussed," Draven said firmly. "But I do not believe that will happen. I believe once they see the truth of our connection, once they understand what this bond truly means, most will accept it far more easily than Victor hopes." Illyra took a deep breath, drawing strength from his confidence, from the steady warmth of his hands around hers. "All right," she said finally, "let's do this." They walked together toward the great hall where the gathering had assembled, hundreds of pack representatives from across the Northern Territories, waiting to hear whatever announcement had brought them together on such short notice. As they approached the entrance, Illyra caught sight of Edmund waiting nearby, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes carrying quiet encouragement. "Whatever happens in there," he said softly as they passed, "know that you have already proven more courage than many wolves born into this world. Whatever the packs decide tonight, that courage will not go unnoticed." His words offered small comfort as the great doors opened before them, revealing a massive hall filled with representatives from every corner of Draven's territory, their conversations falling silent the moment the king and the human woman beside him stepped into view. Illyra felt hundreds of eyes settle on her at once, curious, calculating, some clearly hostile even before any explanation had been offered. Somewhere among the crowd, though she could not immediately locate him, she knew Victor Sterling was watching as well, waiting to see exactly how this moment would unfold, ready to seize any opportunity the situation might present to further his own ambitions. Draven squeezed her hand gently, a silent reminder that whatever came next, they would face it together, before stepping forward to address the assembled crowd, his voice carrying clearly through the massive hall as he began the announcement that would forever change both of their lives, and quite possibly the future of the entire Northern Territory. "Thank you all for gathering on such short notice," Draven began, his voice steady and commanding despite the enormity of what he was about to reveal. "I know many of you expected this meeting to address matters of trade and border security, and we will discuss those topics before the evening ends. But first, There is a matter of far greater personal significance that I must share with you directly, rather than allowing rumor and speculation to continue spreading unchecked. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Alira felt the weight of hundreds of curious stares settling more intently upon her, though she forced herself to stand tall beside Draven, refusing to let her nervousness show. Several weeks ago, at a human festival in the town of Millbrook, I witnessed something extraordinary, Draven continued. A young woman performed a dance passed down through her family for generations, a dance her family believed to be nothing more than beautiful tradition. What none of them realized was that this dance originated centuries ago, created by one of my own ancestors for a human woman he loved deeply, a woman he recognized as his true mate. The murmur among the crowd grew louder, and Draven paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle before continuing. This woman standing beside me, Alira Hartley, is the descendant of that original bond, carrying within her family's tradition an echo of something ancient and powerful. The moment I witnessed her perform that dance, I felt a connection awaken within me that I have never experienced before, a bond that many of you understand to be exceptionally rare among our kind. He turned to look at Alira directly, his expression softening despite the formal setting, and something in his gaze gave her the courage to speak as well, her voice carrying clearly through the now completely silent hall. I understand this is unexpected, and perhaps difficult for some of you to accept, she said, her voice steadier than she had expected given how nervous she felt. 3 weeks ago, I had no idea any of this world existed. I was simply a woman running a small flower shop, living an ordinary human life. But since learning the truth, I have come to understand the significance of this bond, and I have chosen, of my own free will, to embrace whatever future it might bring, alongside Draven and his people. Silence stretched through the hall for a long, tense moment, before a voice called out from somewhere near the back of the crowd, smooth and confident, immediately recognizable to both Draven and Alira. A touching story, Victor Sterling said, stepping forward from among the gathered representatives, his expression carrying practiced concern that did not quite mask the calculation beneath it. But forgive me, Alpha King, if some of us struggle to see how a human woman, however meaningful this ancient bond might be, strengthens your position as leader of the Northern Territories. If anything, does this connection not represent exactly the kind of vulnerability our enemies might seek to exploit? Murmurs of agreement rippled through parts of the crowd, and Alira felt her heart pound faster, aware that this exact confrontation was precisely what Draven had prepared her to expect. An interesting question, Alpha Sterling, Draven said calmly, turning to face Victor directly, though I would ask you this in return. Since when has love been considered a weakness among our people, rather than a source of strength? My father taught me that a king's greatest power comes not from isolation, but from the bonds he forms and protects. Alira's presence beside me does not diminish my ability to lead. It strengthens my resolve to protect what matters most. Beautiful words, Victor said, his tone carrying a subtle edge of mockery. But words alone do not guarantee protection when enemies target what a king holds dear. Have you considered, Alpha King, that your enemies might see this human woman as the easiest path toward weakening your rule entirely? A single vulnerable target, undefended by the natural strength our own kind possesses. The implied threat in his words was not lost on anyone in the hall, and Alira felt a chill run through her despite her determination to remain composed. Draven's expression hardened noticeably, his earlier calm giving way to something far more dangerous. Are you suggesting a threat against my mate, Alpha Sterling? Draven asked, his voice dropping low and dangerous, carrying clearly through the silent hall despite its quiet volume. Victor's expression shifted quickly, recognizing he had pushed slightly too far. Of course not, Alpha King. I am simply raising legitimate concerns that any responsible leader among us would consider regarding pack security. Surely you cannot fault me for prioritizing the safety and stability of Northern Territories. Your concerns are noted, Draven said coldly. But let me be equally clear, to you and to everyone gathered here tonight, Alira Hartley is not merely my mate. She stands with full protection of the Northern Packs, under my direct authority as Alpha King. Any threat against her, whether direct or implied, will be treated with the same severity as a direct challenge against my own person and rule. The declaration carried unmistakable weight through the hall, and Alira watched as several representatives exchanged glances, some nodding slowly in what appeared to be growing respect for Draven's unwavering position, though others, clearly aligned with Victor's ambitions, maintained more skeptical expressions. Victor studied Draven for a long moment, calculation clearly working behind his controlled expression, before offering a shallow bow that carried more mockery than genuine respect. "Understood, Alpha King. I meant no disrespect toward your mate, only genuine concern for the stability of our shared territories. I wish you both well in whatever future this bond might bring." He retreated back into the crowd, though Alira noticed several wolves near him, leaning close, whispering among themselves, and she suspected this confrontation was far from truly resolved, despite Draven's firm declaration. The formal gathering continued for another hour, addressing the trade and security matters originally intended for discussion, though the tension surrounding the earlier confrontation lingered heavily throughout the remainder of the evening. Alira remained close beside Draven throughout, gradually growing more comfortable navigating the formal customs and conversations expected of her new position, drawing quiet strength from the steady presence of Edmund and several other pack members who approached her directly to offer genuine welcome despite the political tension surrounding their bond. By the time the gathering finally concluded and the Great Hall began emptying of representatives returning to their respective territories, Alira felt emotionally and physically exhausted, though also strangely proud of having faced the confrontation without backing down. "You did remarkably well tonight," Draven told her, once they finally found a quiet moment alone, in a smaller chamber, adjacent to the main hall. "I was terrified the entire time," Alira admitted, sinking gratefully into a comfortable chair near the fireplace. "Fear and courage are not opposites," Draven said, echoing the same wisdom Grace had offered her days before, and Alira smiled despite her exhaustion, wondering if perhaps some truths simply carried universal weight, regardless of who spoke them. "What happens now?" she asked. "With Victor, I mean. That confrontation didn't feel resolved." Draven's expression grew more serious, and he moved to sit beside her, taking her hand gently in his own. "Victor will not give up his ambitions easily, Alira. Tonight's declaration protects you formally under pack law, which limits his ability to act against you directly, without severe consequences. But men like Victor rarely respect boundaries when they believe an advantage still exists to be gained. So we need to be careful," Alira said. "More careful than before," Draven confirmed. "I will increase your protection further, and I will ask Edmund to monitor any suspicious activity near Southern Territory borders. Whatever Victor plans next, I intend to be prepared for it." Alira nodded slowly, understanding the seriousness of the situation despite her exhaustion. "I trust you," she said quietly. "Whatever comes next, I trust that we can face it together." Draven lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss against her knuckles, the same tender gesture he had offered before the gathering began, though it carried even greater weight now, given everything they had just faced together and survived. "Together," he agreed softly. Outside the palace walls, beneath a sky filled with countless stars, the northern territories settled into an uneasy quiet, the formal announcement of the king's mate now spreading rapidly among every pack throughout the region. Some celebrated the news with genuine warmth, recognizing the rarity and significance of a true mate bond. Others watched with cautious uncertainty, waiting to see how this unprecedented situation would ultimately unfold. And in the shadowed forests along the southern border, Victor Sterling gathered his most trusted allies close, his earlier calm expression finally giving way to the calculated fury he had carefully hidden throughout the evening's confrontation. "The king has made his declaration," Victor said quietly to those gathered around him. "But declarations alone do not guarantee protection. Begin preparing. If Draven Ashworth insists on maintaining this weakness at his side, then we will find the opportunity to use it against him, whether he expects it or not." The storm that had been building since the night of the Forbidden Dance was finally beginning to break, and neither Draven nor Alira yet understood just how dangerous the coming days would prove to be. 2 weeks passed following the formal announcement, and slowly, Alira began settling into the strange rhythm of her new life. She continued running the flower shop in Millbrook, though now with a more visible presence of guards stationed discreetly nearby, and she spent increasing amounts of time at the palace, gradually learning the customs and responsibilities that came with standing beside an Alpha King. Despite the underlying tension surrounding Victor's continued ambitions, these weeks carried genuine moments of happiness as well. Draven made time each day to visit her, regardless of how demanding his responsibilities as king became, and their conversations grew increasingly comfortable, filled with easy laughter alongside deeper discussions about the future they were slowly building together. Grace visited often as well, delighted to finally share openly the family history she had carried privately for so many years. And Alira found comfort in watching her grandmother's quiet joy at seeing generations of careful secrecy finally give way to open acceptance. But the peace proved temporary. Edmund arrived at the palace late one evening with news that immediately shattered the fragile calm they had been cautiously enjoying. He found Draven in his private study, reviewing reports from the eastern border, and the urgency in Edmund's expression brought Draven immediately to his feet. "What's happened?" Draven asked. "Scouts report unusual movement along the southern border," Edmund said, spreading a map across the desk between them. "Victor has been gathering allied packs for the past several days, far more than would be needed for any routine border patrol." Draven studied the map carefully, his expression darkening as he traced the marked locations of Victor's suspected forces. "How many packs has he gathered?" "At least 4 smaller territories have pledged support, based on what our scouts have observed," Edmund said grimly. "Combined with his own pack's strength, that gives him a significant force, more than enough to mount a serious challenge if he chooses to act. A challenge for leadership must follow proper formal procedures," Draven said, though concern was clearly building beneath his controlled tone. "He cannot simply attack without cause." "Unless he manufactures a cause," Edmund said quietly. "My king, I believe Victor may be planning to target Alira directly, using an attack against her as justification for claiming you have failed to adequately protect the northern territories, weakening your position enough to justify a formal challenge for leadership." The implication settled heavily over the room, and Draven's hands curled into tight fists against the surface of his desk. "Where is Alira right now?" "At the flower shop, my king, as usual for this hour. Guards remain stationed nearby, but if Victor intends a coordinated attack with the forces he has gathered, our current protection may not be sufficient." Draven moved quickly, gathering his cloak and heading toward the door with Edmund following closely behind. "Double the guards immediately. I want additional forces positioned around Millbrook before nightfall, and I want Alira brought to the palace grounds where she can be properly protected." "Understood, my king. I will coordinate with the border patrols immediately." As Edmund departed to arrange additional security, Draven made his way quickly toward Millbrook, his wolf restless beneath his skin, every instinct screaming at him to reach Alira as quickly as possible. The evening air felt charged with tension, and as he approached the edge of town, he noticed immediately that something felt wrong. An unnatural quiet settled over streets that should have carried the ordinary sounds of evening activity. He reached the flower shop to find the guards positioned outside tense and alert, their attention focused intently on the tree line at the edge of town. "Report," Draven demanded. "We've detected movement along the northern edge of the forest, my king," one guard reported quickly. "Multiple unfamiliar scents, consistent with southern pack territory. We believe a coordinated approach may be underway." Draven's blood ran cold at the confirmation of exactly the threat Edmund had warned him about. He moved quickly into the shop, finding Alira closing up for the evening, completely unaware of the danger gathering just beyond the town's edge. "We need to leave now," he said, his voice carrying an urgency that immediately caught her attention. "What's wrong?" Alira asked, setting down the flowers she had been arranging. "Victor has gathered allied forces along the border. Edmund believes he may be planning to target you directly to justify a challenge against my leadership." Alira's face paled, but she nodded quickly, understanding the seriousness of the situation without requiring further explanation. "What do we do?" "We move to the palace immediately, where you can be properly protected," Draven said, already guiding her toward the door. They had barely stepped outside when the first attack came, a coordinated strike from multiple directions that sent Draven's guards scrambling into defensive positions. Draven pulled Alira close, shielding her with his own body, as chaos erupted around them, the sounds of snarling and combat filling the previously quiet evening air. "Stay close to me," Draven said firmly, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of immediate danger, his wolf straining beneath his skin, desperate to fully shift and join the defense directly. A figure emerged from the shadows near the tree line, moving with confident, deliberate steps that immediately identified him, even in the dim evening light. "Alpha King," Victor said, his earlier polite mask completely abandoned, replaced by cold, calculated ambition. "I did warn you that your human mate represented a vulnerability worth exploiting." "This is treachery, Victor," Draven growled, positioning himself protectively between Victor and Alira. "An unprovoked attack violates every formal law governing challenges between packs." "Laws matter little once victory is secured," Victor said with a cold smile. "Once your human mate is eliminated, once your position has been sufficiently weakened, few among the packs will question how that victory was achieved. They will simply follow whoever proves strong enough to lead them." Draven felt his careful control finally shatter completely, the restraint he had maintained throughout his entire adult life, giving way beneath the direct threat against everything he had come to treasure over these past weeks. His shift came instantly and completely, transforming him into the massive midnight wolf Alira had witnessed only once before, though now his golden eyes carried none of the careful gentleness from that earlier moment, replaced instead by fierce, protective fury. Victor's own wolves emerged from the surrounding shadows, and for a terrifying moment, Alira found herself caught in the middle of what promised to become a brutal confrontation between opposing forces. Draven's guards fought fiercely to hold their positions, but Victor's numbers, gathered carefully over recent days, threatened to overwhelm their defenses. "Alira, get behind me," Draven commanded, his wolf voice carrying clearly, despite his transformed state, and she scrambled quickly to comply, pressing herself against the shop's outer wall as the massive wolf positioned himself protectively before her. Victor shifted as well, revealing a wolf nearly as large as Draven himself, dark gray fur bristling with aggressive intent as he circled carefully, searching for any opening in Draven's defensive positioning. The confrontation that followed happened faster than Alira could properly process, a blur of motion and sound, as Draven fought with fierce, desperate determination against Victor's calculated aggression. She watched in horrified fascination as the two massive wolves clashed repeatedly, the sounds of their combat echoing through the previously peaceful streets of Millbrook, drawing frightened glances from any nearby residents who happened to witness the extraordinary battle unfolding. Draven fought with everything he possessed, his earlier careful control completely abandoned in favor of raw, protective fury. But Victor had clearly prepared extensively for this confrontation, his movements calculated and precise, searching for weaknesses with cold, methodical intention. At one point, Victor managed to knock Draven back with a powerful strike, sending him stumbling closer to where Alira stood pressed against the shop wall. Victor lunged forward immediately, seizing the opportunity to close the distance toward Alira directly, and for one terrifying moment, she found herself staring directly into the calculating golden eyes of Victor's wolf form as he prepared to strike. But Draven recovered instantly, positioning himself between them just in time, taking the brunt of Victor's attack directly, rather than allowing it to reach Alira. The impact sent both massive wolves tumbling together, and Alira watched in horror as Draven struggled against Victor's continued aggressive assault, blood visible against his dark fur, where Victor's attacks had found their mark. "Draven!" she screamed, her voice carrying desperate fear through the chaotic scene surrounding them. Something in her voice seemed to reach him, or perhaps it was simply the desperate need to protect her that fueled his final surge of strength. Draven's wolf let out a fierce, powerful roar, and with a burst of renewed determination, he finally overwhelmed Victor's continued assault, pinning the Southern Alpha firmly beneath his greater strength. Victor struggled briefly before finally going still, recognizing the clear defeat in his position, and slowly, reluctantly, he shifted back into his human form, breathing hard, blood visible from several wounds sustained during the fierce confrontation. "This ends now, Victor," Draven said, also shifting back into human form, standing over his defeated opponent, with barely controlled fury still evident in his tightened expression. "Your challenge has failed. Your treachery has been witnessed by pack members from multiple territories. Under formal pack law, this defeat ends your ambitions toward Northern leadership permanently." Victor said nothing, his earlier confident ambition completely replaced by the sullen acceptance of clear defeat. Draven's guards moved quickly to restrain him properly, while others tended to the wounded from both sides of the brief but intense confrontation. Draven turned immediately toward Alira, who remained pressed against the shop wall, her entire body trembling from the adrenaline and fear of what she had just witnessed. He crossed the distance between them quickly, gathering her carefully into his arms despite his own visible injuries. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, checking her carefully for any sign of injury. "I'm fine," Alira said, though her voice shook noticeably. "You're the one who's hurt, Draven." "These wounds are nothing," Draven said, though Alira could see clearly that some of the injuries Victor had inflicted were far from minor. "What matters is that you are safe." She held on to him tightly, finally allowing herself to fully process the terror of watching him fight so fiercely on her behalf, the overwhelming relief of seeing him emerge victorious, despite the clear danger he had faced. Around them, the chaos of the confrontation slowly began settling into organized aftermath, guards securing Victor and his defeated allies, others beginning the careful process of tending to various injuries sustained throughout the brief but intense battle. "It's over," Draven said softly, holding her close despite his own injuries. "Whatever Victor hoped to achieve tonight, his ambitions have failed completely. You are safe now, Alira. This threat has finally been resolved." But even as he spoke the reassuring words, both of them understood that the events of this night would carry lasting consequences, not just for Victor and his defeated allies, but for the entire structure of power throughout the northern and southern territories, consequences that would need careful navigation in the days and weeks ahead. For now, though, standing together in the aftermath of the fierce confrontation, wrapped securely in each other's arms beneath the quiet stars of a Millbrook evening, both Draven and Alira allowed themselves a small, precious moment of relief, grateful simply to have survived the storm together, and more determined than ever to face whatever challenges still remained ahead of them, as one. In the days that followed the confrontation with Victor Sterling, the Northern Territories buzzed with news of what had transpired outside the small flower shop in Millbrook. Word spread quickly among the packs, carried by those who had witnessed the battle firsthand, and the story shifted significantly from Victor's earlier carefully crafted narrative of weakness and vulnerability. Instead, the packs now spoke of an Alpha King who had fought fiercely and successfully to protect his chosen mate, demonstrating exactly the kind of unwavering strength and loyalty that had defined the greatest leaders throughout their history. Representatives from territories that had previously remained cautiously neutral began reaching out formally to pledge continued support, while several of the smaller packs that had briefly aligned with Victor's ambitions quickly distanced themselves from his defeated cause, eager to demonstrate their continued loyalty to Draven's leadership. Victor himself faced formal judgment before a council of pack elders, his treacherous attack representing a severe violation of laws governing proper challenges between territories. Draven, despite his personal anger toward the man who had threatened Alira so directly, insisted on a fair and measured judgment, rather than allowing his own emotions to dictate an excessively harsh punishment. "Exile," Draven announced formally, standing before the assembled council several days after the confrontation. "Victor Sterling's rights to lead any pack within these territories are permanently revoked. He will be stripped of his current position and banished from northern and southern lands, forbidden from returning under any circumstances." The judgment, while severe, avoided the more permanent consequences some council members had initially argued for, and Draven's measured approach only further strengthened the pack's respect for his leadership, demonstrating that his authority came not from cruelty, but from careful, principled strength. With the immediate threat resolved, Alira found herself finally able to breathe more easily, settling into her new life alongside Draven, with growing confidence and comfort. The guards that had once felt like an unwelcome constant presence gradually became familiar, trusted faces, and she found herself building genuine friendships among the pack members who had initially approached her connection to Draven with cautious uncertainty. One afternoon, several weeks after Victor's formal exile, Alira returned to her grandmother's cottage, finding Grace once again tending carefully to her garden, though this time with a lighter, more relaxed energy than the careful weight she had always carried during their previous conversations about the family's hidden history. "You look happy," Grace observed, setting down her gardening tools as Elira approached. "I think I finally am," Elira admitted, settling onto the familiar bench beside her grandmother. "It's strange, isn't it? A few months ago, my life felt completely ordinary, predictable in every way. Now everything has changed so completely, and somehow, despite all the danger and uncertainty, I feel more like myself than I ever have before." Grace smiled warmly, reaching over to take her granddaughter's hand. "That is often how these things work, dear. Sometimes the most extraordinary changes reveal parts of ourselves we never knew existed, strength and courage we might never have discovered otherwise." "Do you think the original Hartley who learned this dance felt the same way?" Elira asked, facing a completely unexpected new world, uncertain but somehow finding her place within it anyway. "I imagine she did," Grace said thoughtfully. "Family stories suggest she faced considerable difficulty and danger before finally finding peace within this extraordinary new life. But she also found genuine happiness, a love that lasted for the rest of her days, and a legacy that eventually led directly to this very moment, all these generations later." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the afternoon light filter through the garden, before Elira finally spoke again, something clearly weighing on her mind. "Draven asked me something last night," she said quietly. "Something significant." Grace's expression grew knowing, though she waited patiently for Elira to continue, rather than pressing for details. "He asked me to formally accept the bond completely, in the traditional way his people recognize such commitments. He explained it's similar to what humans might consider a marriage, though it carries even deeper significance among wolves, a permanent joining, recognized by pack law and tradition alike." "And what did you tell him?" Grace asked gently. "I told him I needed a little time to think about it properly," Elira said. "Not because I have doubts about my feelings for him, but because I wanted to make sure I was choosing this fully, with complete understanding of everything it means, rather than simply being swept along by everything that's happened so quickly." Grace nodded approvingly. "That sounds like wisdom, dear. A decision this significant deserves careful consideration, regardless of how strongly you feel." "I do love him, grandmother," Elira said softly. "More than I ever expected to feel for anyone, honestly. The dance, the bond, all of it started this connection. But what I feel for him now goes so far beyond anything ancient or predetermined. I love who he is, the way he's fought so hard to protect, not just me, but his entire pack, the careful way he balances strength with genuine kindness." "Then perhaps your answer is already clear," Grace said with a gentle smile. "Sometimes we simply need to give ourselves permission to fully embrace what our hearts already know." Elira left her grandmother's cottage that evening with a clarity she had been searching for throughout the previous weeks of careful consideration. She made her way toward the palace, finding Draven exactly where she expected, reviewing reports in his private study, though he looked up immediately the moment she entered, his expression carrying the same hopeful uncertainty he had shown when first asking his question the night before. "I've made my decision," Elira said, crossing the room toward him. Draven rose slowly from his desk, studying her expression carefully, searching for any indication of what her answer might be. "And?" "Yes," Elira said simply, though the single word carried the full weight of everything she had come to understand and embrace over these extraordinary past weeks. "I want to accept the bond completely, Draven. I want to build this life together with you, fully, without hesitation." The relief and joy that flooded across Draven's expression was unmistakable, and he crossed the remaining distance between them quickly, gathering her into his arms with the same protective warmth he had shown from nearly the very beginning of their unexpected connection. "You have made me happier than I ever believed possible," he said softly, pressing his forehead gently against hers. "Even after everything? The danger? The politics? Victor's attack?" Elira asked. "Especially after everything," Draven said firmly. "Because through all of it, you never once backed away from facing these challenges beside me. That courage, that steady strength you've shown throughout this entire journey, only confirms everything I felt the very first moment I saw you dance beneath that festival moonlight." The formal joining ceremony took place several weeks later, drawing representatives from across every territory throughout the northern lands, along with Alira's small circle of human friends and family, who had gradually come to understand and accept the extraordinary new world she had become part of. Grace stood proudly among the guests, watching her granddaughter complete a journey that had begun generations earlier with an ancestor whose own love story had first created the forbidden dance that eventually brought Draven and Alira together. As the ceremony concluded and celebrations began throughout the palace grounds, Draven found a quiet moment to lead Alira away from the joyful crowd, guiding her toward the same tree line at the edge of Millbrook, where he had first revealed the truth of his nature weeks before. "Do you remember this place?" he asked, taking her hands gently in his own, beneath the same moonlight that had witnessed so much of their extraordinary journey together. "Of course I do," Alira said, smiling warmly at the memory. "This is where you told me the truth, where you showed me who you really are." "I wanted to bring you back here tonight," Draven said, "to remind us both of how far we've come since that moment. Everything we've faced together, every danger, every difficult conversation, every moment of uncertainty, it all led us exactly here, exactly to this life we've chosen to build together." Alira leaned into him, feeling the same overwhelming warmth and certainty that had guided her through every difficult decision throughout their journey together. "I wouldn't change any of it," she said softly. "Not the fear, not the danger, not even the uncertainty, because all of it led me to you, to this extraordinary life I never could have imagined for myself." They stood together beneath the moonlight for a long, peaceful moment, two people from entirely different worlds who had found something rare and precious in each other, a bond that had begun with an ancient dance and grown into something even more powerful through genuine love, courage, and unwavering commitment to face whatever future awaited them, together. Behind them, the sounds of celebration continued throughout the palace grounds, marking not just the joining of an Alpha King and his human mate, but the beginning of a new chapter for the entire Northern Territories, one built on the understanding that true strength came not from isolation or fear, but from the courage to embrace love wherever it might be found, however unexpected its origins might seem. The forbidden dance that had once seemed destined only to cause chaos and danger had ultimately revealed something far more meaningful, a connection strong enough to unite two entirely different worlds, and a love powerful enough to overcome every challenge that stood against it. And as Draven and Alira finally turned to make their way back toward the joyful celebration awaiting them, both understood with complete certainty that whatever challenges the future might still hold, they would face them exactly as they had faced everything since that fateful festival night, together, unafraid, and completely devoted to the extraordinary life they had chosen to build side by side.